It was an ordinary night, the kind where everything felt peaceful. But then, without warning, a flash of bright blue light filled my room. I woke up, heart racing, as I noticed a figure standing near the window. It was a girl with silver hair and glowing violet eyes. She looked just as shocked as I was. "You weren't supposed to see me," she whispered, her voice more in my mind than in my ears. I tried to move, but something held me in place. I couldn't speak or even breathe properly. My eyes widened, unsure if I was dreaming. She raised her hand, and the air around us felt electric. "Please," she said softly, "I need your help." Part 2. Strangers in my room. The girl's presence was overwhelming. Despite the fear in her eyes, I could sense she wasn't a threat. Slowly, the pressure on my body faded, and I could move again. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. She hesitated, glancing nervously at the window before answering. "I'm not from here. I came by accident." Her words didn't make sense. She wasn't from here. My mind raced, struggling to understand what was happening. This couldn't be real. She wasn't human. Her appearance was proof of that. But her voice, her plea, it all felt too real. "How did you end up here?" Part 3. Her story. The alien girl took a deep breath, her violet eyes meeting mine with trust and desperation. "I was trying to escape," she said. "I don't belong in your world. I'm being hunted." My confusion grew. Hunted? By who? I asked. She didn't answer immediately, looking down at the floor, as if the thought alone was too painful to discuss. "I'm from another world, a different galaxy," she continued. "I didn't mean to crash here, but they found me. They'll destroy everything if they catch me." I felt a chill run down my spine. Was she really telling the truth? Could this be happening? Part 4. A dangerous decision. I stood there, unsure of what to do. My mind was racing, but I couldn't ignore the fear and desperation in her eyes. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Her gaze softened, and for a moment I saw the pain in her eyes. "I need to hide. I need to stay hidden long enough to fix my ship. It's the only way I can get back home." I looked around my room, wondering how I could possibly help. I was just a regular person. But then her voice reached me again. "You don't have much time. They'll be looking for me everywhere." I knew right then that I had no choice. I couldn't leave her to face whatever was coming along. Part 5. The hunt begins. Days passed, and I did everything I could to keep her hidden. She didn't leave my room, and I did my best to explain her presence to anyone who asked. I couldn't tell anyone the truth, but I was starting to realize how real this all was. There were strange things happening. Shadows lurking outside my window. A faint hum in the air at night. One evening, as we sat together, she suddenly tensed. "They're close." I looked at her, terrified. "Who? Who's after you?" She didn't answer, but her fear was palpable. The air around us seemed to thicken, and I could hear faint sounds in the distance, like ships or something larger in the sky. Part 6. The final choice. The next few days felt like a blur. I helped her as best as I could, but time was running out. The hunters were closing in, and we had no choice but to act quickly. Her ship was almost repaired, but there was one final obstacle. She needed a special energy source, one that could only be found far away. We were ready to leave, but as we stood at the door, she looked at me one last time. "You've helped me more than you'll ever know," she said softly. I didn't want to let her go. I had grown attached to her, and the idea of saying goodbye was almost unbearable. But I knew she had to leave. She wasn't meant for this world. "Will I ever see you again?" She smiled, the glow in her eyes softening. "Perhaps." With that, she stepped out into the night, vanishing into the unknown, leaving me to wonder if our paths would ever cross again. It was a typical night, the kind where everything felt so calm, almost too calm. The soft hum of the fan was the only sound breaking the silence in my room. I had just finished a long day of school, and I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, waiting for sleep to take over. Nothing seemed unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, everything changed. It started with a flicker of light. At first, I thought it was a headlight shining through my window. But no, it wasn't that. The light wasn't coming from outside. It came from somewhere inside the room. And it was bright, blindingly bright. My phone screen turned black as the glow filled the space, and I felt the air around me grow thick and warm, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I blinked, and the light intensified, blurring everything around me. I tried to shield my eyes with my hand, but it didn't help. The glow surrounded me, swallowed me whole. I felt my heart race, pounding in my chest, like it was trying to escape. Panic gripped me, and I scrambled to sit up, but my body wouldn't respond the way I wanted. It was as though my limbs were frozen in place. My breath came in shallow gasps, and my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. What was happening? Was this some kind of weird dream? And then, just as quickly as it had started, the light disappeared. I was left sitting in my bed, breathless and confused. The room was back to its usual dimness, but something wasn't right. I didn't feel alone anymore. A strange presence filled the room. My eyes darted around, trying to find the source, but the place looked the same as it had a second ago. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. Standing by the window was a girl. She was tall, almost unnaturally so, with long silver hair that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Her skin had an ethereal glow, like it wasn't quite of this world. She wasn't dressed like anyone I knew. The fabric of her clothes was smooth and metallic, shimmering in a way that made it hard to focus on her features fully. But it wasn't just her appearance that made me freeze in place. It was the sheer feeling of otherness she gave off. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. She didn't seem scared, just lost. Her violet eyes were wide, and I could see the same confusion mirrored in her gaze. But there was something more, something almost desperate. Then she spoke, but not in a way I was used to. It wasn't through her mouth. It was like her voice was inside my head. "You weren't supposed to see me." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I tried to respond, but nothing came out. My mouth was dry, and my brain was a blur. Was I dreaming? Had I fallen asleep, and this was some kind of weird nightmare? There was no way this was real. But the presence of the girl, her sudden appearance, felt too real to be anything but. My heart thudded in my chest as I tried to move, tried to speak. But I couldn't. It was as though invisible chains were holding me down. I felt completely trapped. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't control my own body. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to escape, but I couldn't move a muscle. The girl took a step closer. Her eyes flickered as though she was reading my thoughts, sensing my fear. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. It was like I wasn't allowed to speak, like my voice had been stolen away. Then she raised her hand slowly, as if testing the air between us. There was a soft hum, like electricity, buzzing through the air. The atmosphere thickened, and I felt the weight of something unseen pressing against me. My breath became shallow, and for a second, it felt like the room was closing in on me. Her voice echoed inside my head again, though softer this time, almost pleading. "Please, don't be afraid." I tried to speak. What are you?" But my mouth wouldn't work. I could hear the words in my mind, but they didn't escape my lips. The girl stepped closer, her presence almost overwhelming now. I could feel the heat of her energy, the strange power that seemed to surround her. But the strangest thing was that she didn't look hostile. She didn't look angry or threatening. Instead, there was something else in her eyes, something like fear, confusion, and a hint of sadness. She stopped in front of me, her eyes locked on mine. There was a long silence, and for a moment I thought she might speak again. But instead, she reached out slowly. I flinched, unsure of what to do. But instead of touching me, she placed her hand just above my head, as though she were testing the space between us. Suddenly, the pressure on my body released. My muscles uncoiled, and I could finally move again. I gasped for air, suddenly aware of how difficult it had been to breathe. My chest felt tight, and my legs wobbled as I stood up from the bed. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I couldn't believe what was happening. My mind couldn't make sense of any of it. The girl didn't move, but her eyes never left mine. "I need your help," she said. The words were soft, almost like a plea. But this time, they came from her lips, not inside my mind. Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from far away. It wasn't the voice of someone who wanted to hurt me. It was the voice of someone who was in trouble. I opened my mouth, my mind still racing, trying to figure out how to respond. But before I could say anything, she added, "Please, I don't have much time." I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. This couldn't be real, could it? I was just a normal person, just a regular teenager. I had no idea how to help an alien girl who had somehow ended up in my room. But there she was, standing before me. She wasn't a figment of my imagination. She was real. She was here. And she needed something from me. I had no idea how to react, no idea what was happening. My heart pounded, my thoughts tangled. The more I looked at her, the more I could sense that whatever this was, it wasn't just a strange coincidence. It was something bigger, something important. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite understand, something that could change everything. Her voice cut through my thoughts again, low and urgent. "They will come for me. If they find me, everything will be lost." My eyes widened. "Who?" I asked, finally managing to speak. The question slipped out before I even realized I was asking it. She hesitated. For a moment, it seemed like she was weighing whether or not to tell me. Then, with a sad sigh, she answered, "The ones who chased me here." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing. I was completely out of my depth. But I also knew that this wasn't something I could just ignore. She needed help. And whether or not I believed her, I couldn't leave her here alone. I took a deep breath, my voice shaking slightly. "What do you need me to do?" She looked at me, her eyes softening just a little. "I need to hide, just for a little while. Long enough to fix what I came here for." Fix what? I didn't know, but I nodded anyway. Whatever this was, I had to be a part of it now. There was no going back. And as much as I wanted to run away, something deep inside me told me I couldn't. This strange girl, this alien, was in my room, and everything was about to change. The girl stood in front of me, still glowing faintly in the dark room, her violet eyes never leaving mine. I was still trying to make sense of everything. This wasn't a dream. She was real, and she was asking for my help. But how could I help someone like her? Someone who wasn't even from this world. I glanced around the room, my heart racing. Nothing seemed out of place. My desk, the books on the shelf, my clothes scattered on the floor, all of it looked normal. But then, I turned my attention back to her, and suddenly, the room didn't feel like my own anymore. It felt foreign. The air around her seemed charged with something, like electricity or a force I couldn't understand. The silence between us was thick, as if something huge was about to happen. I was still frozen, unsure of what to do. My mind was spinning. You're really not from here?" I finally asked, the words coming out more shaky than I intended. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she seemed to consider my question carefully, as if weighing whether to trust me. Then, with a soft sigh, she nodded. "No, I'm not from here." Her voice sounded calm, but I could hear the fear underneath it. The fear that she was running out of time. The fear that I might not believe her, or worse, that I might turn my back on her. I don't understand," I stammered. How did you get here? What do you need from me?" My voice felt too loud in the silence of the room. She took a slow step closer, and I instinctively stepped back, unsure of what she might do. But she didn't approach any further. She just stood there, watching me closely, her eyes softening a little. I didn't mean to land here. It was an accident. My ship was damaged during an escape, and I crashed here. Her words didn't make sense. An alien ship. Escape? I didn't know what to think. This was getting more surreal by the second. She seemed so human, yet so different. It was like she didn't quite belong here, but at the same time, I couldn't deny that she was standing right in front of me, speaking to me as if we were old friends. You came from another planet. I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded again, but this time, there was a sadness in her eyes, something that made my heart ache. Yes, she said quietly. From a place far from here, a place where things are very different from your world. I stared at her, trying to process everything she was telling me. A part of me still didn't believe her. I had seen sci-fi movies, read books about aliens and spaceships, but this was real, and I was part of it now. Before I could ask anything else, the girl spoke again, her voice urgent. You don't have much time. They will come for me. My stomach dropped. Who will come for you? Who are you running from? I had to know. I needed to understand why she was in my room, why she needed my help. My voice cracked, but I pushed through it. She hesitated, her gaze flickering away for a brief moment, as though the memory of whatever she was running from was too much to bear. Her eyes became distant for a moment, filled with a deep sadness that made my heart ache even more. They're called the Cynthians, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. A ruthless group of hunters who track down people like me. We're not the only ones who've escaped from them. There are others, but they will stop at nothing to find us. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Hunters. What did she mean by that? What do they want with you? Why are they after you? She looked down, almost ashamed. They want to use us, like weapons. We are not all like them. Some of us, we have powers that they cannot control, and they want to harness that power for their own gain. I stared at her, my mind trying to wrap around the idea of alien hunters chasing her, of powers I couldn't even begin to understand. How could someone like me, a regular teenager, be involved in something so dangerous? I opened my mouth to ask more, but she raised her hand, stopping me. I know you're confused. I know it's hard to believe, but you have to trust me. Please. She seemed so vulnerable in that moment. I could see the fear in her eyes, but I could also see something else. Hope. She was hoping that I would believe her, that I would help her. She had no one else, and if I turned her away, I wasn't sure what would happen to her. I looked down at the floor, trying to think. What could I do? I had no training for something like this. I wasn't a hero. I was just a kid in high school who liked video games and hanging out with friends. I had no idea how to hide someone from alien hunters. But then I thought about her words. They will come for me. What did I have to lose by helping her? If I didn't, I might regret it for the rest of my life. I looked back up at her, making a decision. What do you need me to do? She blinked, surprised by my response. I could see the relief flood through her face. I need a place to hide. I can't be found here. Not yet. My ship, it's damaged, and I need time to fix it. But if they find me, I won't survive. The desperation in her voice was real. It was clear she was running out of options, and I was her last chance. I nodded slowly, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Okay, I said. You can hide here. For now. But we have to be careful. No one can know about you. She nodded quickly, her eyes wide with relief. I'll stay in your room, out of sight. You can't tell anyone. Not yet. I agreed, even though the weight of the decision felt heavy in my chest. How was I going to explain this to anyone if someone found out? How could I keep her hidden? Suddenly, a thought occurred to me. What about food? Water? Do you need anything? She paused, looking at me with a slightly confused expression. Food, water. I don't need those things the way you do, but I will need to recharge my energy source in a few days. It's the only way I can fix the ship. Without it, I can't leave." I stared at her, not entirely understanding what she meant by recharging. But I nodded. "Okay, we'll figure that out later. Just stay hidden for now." I led her to the corner of my room, behind a large bookshelf where I kept most of my old things. It wasn't the most comfortable hiding spot, but it was the best I could think of. She seemed to understand, crouching behind the shelf and sitting down quietly. I stood by the door for a moment, my mind still racing. This wasn't normal. Nothing about this situation was normal. But I had to help her. I didn't know why, but I couldn't just leave her alone. She had no one else. And maybe there was more to her story than I could understand right now. I turned to leave, my hand on the door handle, but I heard her voice one last time. "Thank you for trusting me." Her words were soft, and I could hear the relief in them. It was a simple thank you, but it felt like so much more. I closed the door gently behind me, feeling the weight of what I had just agreed to. I had no idea what was coming. But one thing was for sure: this night, and the days to come, would change my life forever. The next few hours felt like a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. An alien girl had appeared in my room, asking for help. It sounded impossible, like something out of a sci-fi movie. But I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't a dream. She was real. And now my world was never going to be the same. I had left her hidden behind the bookshelf, the safest place I could think of. I tried to act normal, even though my mind was anything but. I kept my distance from my parents, not wanting them to hear anything strange. I didn't want them asking questions I couldn't answer. I sat in my bed, staring at the wall. My heart wouldn't stop racing, and my thoughts kept going in circles. How could this happen? Why me? What was I supposed to do next? There were so many questions and so few answers. The silence in my room felt heavy, and I felt more alone than I ever had before. Then, just as I started to drift off to sleep, I heard a soft voice. "Can I come out now?" It was her, the girl. Her voice was quiet, almost like she didn't want to disturb me. But I could hear the hint of worry in her tone. I quickly stood up, my heart beating faster again. I walked over to the bookshelf, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear. I opened the door and looked at her. She was sitting in the same spot, her silver hair glowing softly in the dim light. Her eyes met mine, and I could tell she was waiting for me to say something. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my voice trembled. She nodded, but her expression was a little sad. "I'm okay. I just need to tell you my story. You have to understand what's happened to me, so you'll know why I'm here." I didn't say anything, but I moved to sit on the floor in front of her. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I needed to hear her story if I was going to help her. "You don't have to be afraid of me," she said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need your help." I nodded, but I was still confused. I had no idea what kind of help she needed, or even what she was going through. She seemed so different from anyone I had ever met, like she belonged to another world, but she was here now with me. She took a deep breath, her gaze lowering for a moment. "My name is Zoria," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I come from a place far, far away from here, a planet called Irindor. It's not like Earth. It's a place of energy, a place where life is connected to everything around us." I stared at her, trying to imagine what she was saying. A planet called Irindor. Energy. It all sounded so unreal. But when I looked into her eyes, I could see the pain there. I could tell she was being honest. She wasn't making this up. "On Irindor," she continued, her voice soft but full of emotion, "we live in harmony with the world. We don't just take from nature. We give back to it. We share our energy with the planet, and the planet shares its energy with us. It's a peaceful place, but that peace is being destroyed." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, and I could see the sadness in her eyes. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, waiting for her to explain more. "There are others like me," she said, her eyes growing darker with the memory. "We are called the Illyrians. We are born with the ability to channel and control energy. It's a gift, but it's also a curse. There are groups, like the Scythians, who want to use our abilities for their own gain. They want to control us, to make us their weapons." I felt my stomach twist. Weapons? That sounded terrible. The idea of her being forced to use her powers for something evil made me angry, even though I didn't fully understand it. "The Scythians attacked my people," Zoria continued, her voice growing more urgent. "They came to our planet, and they took many of us. They destroyed everything in their path. I was one of the lucky ones who escaped, but many weren't so fortunate. They took them. They took them for experiments. They wanted to use us for war." I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her, to watch her home destroyed, to see her people hurt, just because they had abilities the Scythians wanted to use. "I was forced to flee," she said, her voice barely a whisper now. "I had no choice. I ran. I tried to warn others, but I was caught by the Scythians. They chased me for a long time, and I barely escaped. My ship was damaged during the chase, and I crashed here, on Earth. I didn't mean to. I had no other place to go." I could hear the guilt in her voice. She felt responsible for everything that had happened, as if she had somehow failed. I wanted to say something comforting, but the words didn't come. I couldn't even imagine how much pain she had been through. "I didn't want to bring them here," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I didn't want to put you in danger, but I need help. I need time to fix my ship so I can leave. If the Scythians find me here—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. If they found her, it would be over. I sat quietly, taking in everything she had said. Her story was so overwhelming, so much bigger than anything I had ever experienced. I had thought my life was complicated, but hearing her speak made me realize how small my problems really were. Zoria looked at me, her eyes searching my face as if looking for some kind of answer. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring all this to you." I shook my head. "It's not your fault. I don't know how to help, but I'll try. You're not alone anymore. I'll do what I can." She looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. You would help me? After everything I've told you?" I nodded. "You've been through so much. I don't know how, but I'll help you." Zoria smiled, a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but it was enough to show me how much my words meant to her. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means to me." For a few moments, we just sat in silence, the weight of her story hanging in the air. I couldn't believe what I had just heard, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't turn my back on her. She had trusted me with her story, and now I had to help her. As I sat there, thinking about what to do next, I realized something important. I had no idea what the future held, or how I was going to keep her safe, but one thing was clear. My life had just changed forever. Zoria needed me, and somehow I was going to make sure she didn't face whatever was coming along. The days after Zoria's story felt like a strange, twisted dream. I had barely any sleep, my mind racing at night with the thought of her situation. She was hiding in my room, and I was doing my best to act like everything was normal. But how could I? There was nothing normal about this. An alien girl, a broken spaceship, and the constant fear of the Scythians hunting her. It was more than I could handle. I had to be careful. If anyone found out, if anyone saw her, it could mean trouble, not just for her, but for me too. The thought of the Scythians finding out where she was terrified me. I didn't know what they could do, but I knew it wouldn't be good. I didn't tell anyone about Zoria. Not even my best friend, Liam. There was no way to explain it. How could I say, "Hey, I'm hiding an alien in my room," without sounding completely insane? No one would believe me. And worse, They might think I was joking. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I spent most of my days at school trying to focus, but it was impossible. My mind kept going back to her, to the danger she was in. Zoria was so far from home, and she had no one but me. That thought kept me up at night. After school one afternoon, I came home to find my room empty. The bookshelf was still pushed aside, but there was no sign of Zoria. I called out for her, but there was no answer. Panic gripped me. I rushed around the room, looking under the bed and in every corner. What if the Scythians had found her? What if they had come and taken her? Zoria! I called again, my voice shaking. Finally, I heard the soft sound of footsteps coming from the closet. I turned quickly and saw her standing there, looking a little more tired than usual. She must have been out of the hiding spot for a while, but her eyes were still wide with fear. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I had to get out for a little while. I needed to stretch my legs. I sighed in relief. It was so easy to forget that Zoria was just as trapped as I felt. She wasn't just hiding in my room for fun. She was running for her life. I couldn't even begin to imagine how hard that must be. But as much as I wanted to help, I knew something had to change. We couldn't just keep hiding forever. If the Scythians were after her, we couldn't expect them to give up. The more time we spent waiting, the more likely it was that they would find us. "We need to make a plan," I said, sitting down on the edge of my bed, my thoughts racing. "We can't stay here forever. Eventually, they'll come. And we need to figure out how to get you off Earth. You can't just stay hidden here." Zoria looked at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But I don't know how to fix the ship. I need more time, but every day it gets harder. The Scythians are getting closer. I can feel them." Her voice trembled, and I could see the worry on her face. Her words hit me hard. The Scythians were getting closer. That meant that they could be out there, searching right now. How long did we have before they found her? And what would happen when they did? I stood up and started pacing. "We can't wait too long. But what if we try to get you to a place where you can fix the ship? There has to be somewhere safe, right?" Zoria frowned. "There is one place, a safe place, but it's far away. It's in the mountains, hidden in an old research facility. My people built it before the Scythians attacked. But it's dangerous to get there, and I'm not sure how much time we have." I froze. The mountains, a hidden research facility. It sounded like something out of a movie, but there was no time to second-guess myself. If this was our only chance, I had to take it. "How far is it?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's a day's travel by foot, maybe longer, but we can't just walk out there. The Scythians have ships, and they can track us. We'll need to be careful." I thought about it for a second. A day's travel? That wasn't too far. But it also wasn't something we could do carelessly. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how dangerous this was. If the Scythians were tracking her, we would have to be smart. We couldn't just run into the mountains without a plan. "Do you have any idea how to stay off their radar?" I asked. "How do we hide from them?" Zoria hesitated. "There's one thing we can try. I can use my energy to cloak us, to make us invisible for a short time. But it's not perfect. It won't last long. And I'll be weak after." I didn't know what to say to that. It was something, at least. We might have a chance if we were careful. But if the cloaking didn't work, we'd be caught for sure. "We'll have to move fast." Then, I said, trying to sound confident, "We can't waste time. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that we'll be found." Zoria nodded, looking even more exhausted than before. "I'll do my best, but I need your help too. I can't do it alone." It was in that moment that I realized something. I wasn't just helping her out of pity or because it was the right thing to do. I was in this with her now. I was taking a dangerous risk by deciding to help. If we were caught, it wouldn't just be her who was in trouble. I'd be in just as much danger. But for some reason, I couldn't back out now. I had made my decision. I couldn't turn my back on her. "Okay, I said, my voice steady despite the fear creeping up inside me. We'll do it. We'll get you to the mountains. We'll get you to safety. Zoria looked at me, a mixture of gratitude and worry in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. I shook my head, cutting her off. We don't have time for that now. We need to focus on getting out of here. We spent the next few hours preparing for the journey. I packed a small bag with supplies, water, food, and some clothes. We couldn't risk staying in one place for too long, so we had to keep moving. Zoria had taught me how to stay low and quiet, to avoid being spotted by anyone who might be looking for us. Finally, as the night began to fall, we made our way out of the house. The streets were quiet, and the darkness worked in our favor. Zoria was already using her energy to cloak us, and though I could still see her, the outside world wouldn't. We moved quickly through the shadows, trying to stay out of sight. Every footstep felt like it could be our last. The further we got from my house, the more nervous I became, but I knew we had no choice. We had to keep going. Zoria kept glancing over her shoulder, her face tense. I can feel them, she said softly. They're close. We need to hurry. My heart skipped a beat. If the Scythians were near, our window of escape was closing fast. We had made our decision. It was dangerous, but it was our only chance, and no matter what, we couldn't turn back. The night felt different as we moved through the streets, the cold air biting at my skin. It wasn't just the chill in the air that made me shiver. It was the feeling of danger that hung over us, like a dark cloud we couldn't shake. I kept looking over my shoulder, my heart racing with every sound. Every step we took felt like it could be our last. Zoria walked beside me, her presence a quiet comfort. She was using her powers to keep us hidden, but every now and then, I could see her struggle. She was weak, and I knew it wasn't easy for her. She was still recovering from the crash, and using her energy to cloak us must have drained her even more. But she didn't complain. She just kept moving forward, her eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. We have to keep going, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The further we get from your house, the safer we'll be. I nodded, though I could feel the weight of her words. The longer we stayed in one place, the more chance there was that the Scythians would find us. They were searching for her. I didn't know how they tracked her, but I knew they had to be close. Every step felt like we were walking on a tightrope. One wrong move, and we could fall. I tried to push my fear aside, focusing on the path ahead. We couldn't stop now. There was too much at stake. As we walked, I started to think about everything Zoria had told me. Her home, her people, the Scythians who had destroyed everything. I couldn't imagine how it must feel for her to be here, on a strange planet, with no way of getting home. The thought of her being alone in this world, hunted by enemies she couldn't outrun, made my heart ache. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't let her face this alone. After what felt like hours of walking, we reached the edge of the city. The buildings started to thin out, and the quiet of the countryside took over. It was dark, but the stars above gave us just enough light to find our way. We need to keep moving, Zoria urged again, her voice shaky now. The Scythians could be closer than we think. My stomach twisted at the thought. Every sound in the distance made my heart skip a beat. It felt like we were being hunted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced at Zoria, and I could see how exhausted she was. Her face was pale, and her steps had slowed. She was trying her best, but I could tell she was reaching her limit. The constant use of her energy to hide us was taking a toll. Are you okay? I asked, my voice full of concern. She nodded, but it didn't reassure me. I'm fine. We just need to get to the mountains. Once we're there, I can fix the ship and we'll be safe. I wanted to believe her, but the more we walked, the more I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The further we went, the more dangerous it became. We couldn't keep running forever. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind us, a sound of something moving through the grass. My heart stopped. Zoria froze beside me. Her eyes widened with fear as she looked at me. "They're here," she whispered. "The Cynthians. They found us." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the danger in the air. The Cynthians were closing in, and I had no idea how to escape them. We had been so careful, so quiet, but somehow they had found us. Zoria grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "We have to run," she said urgently. "Now."